So we're going to have a look now at the point where I feel the discussion about sword and swordsmanship really starts to fall apart. And this is more or less the point where the swords are shown on the table, which is a really bad start.
And these knights carried with them the very latest in sword technology. No longer for them the Saxon pattern welded sword with its heavy straight blade.
Let me just stop you there. Saxon swords, Viking swords, some of them are heavy, some of them are not.
But this, the arming sword, made using properly quenched, hardened and tempered steel. It's much longer, about 31 inches, but it's lighter.
So, I would suggest that you go to Albion Swords website. Now, they have a sword called the Guthiald, I believe, which is a sword which is researched by Peter Johnson, who is always wonderful in such things. Now, I believe that when he says it's longer, the sword that he's talking about has a blade of roughly 36 inches, the one that Peter Johnson is talking about. It's longer. It's a Saxon, Viking, North European type sword. It has a long blade. It has a fuller.
Because of this fuller or groove running down the centre of the blade.
That Saxon swords often have. That Saxes often have. Lots and lots of swords have fullers. Lots of swords later don't have fullers. Some Saxon swords, some Viking swords will only have one edge. It depends on how they're made.
Now, although it's so much bigger, it's also so much easier to wield.
Nonsense. Now, again, I take you back to the whole point, which is that swords vary. Some swords are very, very light. I've been lucky I've got to go to museums and pick them up. Some swords are unwieldy, some swords are long, some swords are short. It depends how they are made. This is nonsense.
In addition, the crossguard, or quill, not present on the Saxon sword, but developed...
Except that it is. It really, really is. Now, if you look at the most basic ones where you have your Saxon and your Viking swords, then the crossguard is very, very thick quite often, but it does cover the knuckles and it covers, it's wider than the blade. We have, again, the Guthiald sword. If you have a look on the Albion sword site, you will see that it has a large crossguard. So we're going to look at the bits pertaining to 133, and as we go through, I'll pause it briefly because there's certain things from a fencing perspective that you want to be aware of. The first thing is here. Now, if you see here, we have the two bucklers forwards. Now, usually if you do this and you have an inclination of the body, you're doing this to entice your opponent's blade past your guard, so that you know which side it's on, and then you can use your secondary hand to guide it where you want to cover that line and attack somewhere else. That's a very, very simplistic view. Now, I will pause this in a minute where this goes wrong.
Rupert, tell me about this manuscript. What exactly is it?
It's the courteous fact book, and it's the first extant example of medieval swordplay that we have in the world. Previously, it's all verbal descriptions or written descriptions. It's the first one where we've actually got pictures of the individual moves and how they can be countered. This, you can actually see how the sword is held, and from that, learn how to fight effectively.
Now, the majority of this I actually agree with, so, you know, that's not too bad. It is teaching you how to deal with certain kinds of swordsmanship.
Very, very important. I mean, you clearly have someone who appears to be a monk, and someone who appears to be really quite feminine.
She does, because she is. And that is because they are keying us into something in the cultural DNA of the time. The monk is seen as steadfast and upright. The woman represents cunning and strategy.
Right. Two things here. First of all, generally the guy is referred to as a priest throughout this, okay? There is a reference to monk in the beginning, I believe, with the deceitful and wanton, and but, can a woman be in a manuscript without having to be representative of something? Up until the 1970s, women were only representative of cheese. So we get to the point now where we're looking at specific techniques within the manual. And I'm actually going to stop you a little bit earlier. Now, bear in mind, Rupert's on the right-hand side here. At one point, the presenter here puts his sword point, rather than centre, puts it over to Rupert's right-hand side, not pointing at Rupert, pointing away, with his sword underneath his buckler arm. Now, I want to draw attention to this in a moment. Now, before he corrects him and tells him that his blade has to be pointing at him, I want you to look at this point here. You see how the sword is actually away from Rupert here. It's off to one side and it's beneath the arm. Now, effectively, because it's not pointing at Rupert, and because it's underneath the arm, it's subrachia, it's beneath the arm. It's not under here as some perfectionists would like you to have it, but it is off to the side. It's not pointing at him, it's off to one side. Now this means that one of the manners that Rupert could have approached him is actually to come into this position here, still covering his hand, and then to enter however. Okay? So had he have done that, there's not a necessity for him to bind the sword because it's pointing away from him, sorry, over this side, it's pointing away from him anyway, but he can cover that line, and if it doesn't come back towards him, he can then hit the gentleman from that point.
I'm ready to go from this guard to parry or deflect your blade and then attack.
So, we've got to the point where now the blade is pointing at us, and as Rupert says, he's now ready to parry or attack, except that we don't parry, we bind, and the bind is a controlling action. Now, because the sword is forwards, if I was in this position here, generally I'd cover my hand with the buckler, come into half shield, and then drop over into a bind, moving around to the outside of your sword as I go. This means that my hand is safe, and it means I can bind your sword, ensuring that you make contact on the strong of mine, nowhere else. It gives me control of your sword. Now, if you look contrary to what I've just said, Rupert actually goes forwards with his right hip here, which will bring his hip into the line of the sword, which makes it very, very, very dangerous. He should have passed around with his left side to get to the outside. By moving his hip through the line, he's endangering himself with a thrust underneath. He then puts his hand more or less directly into the line, except it would have been in the line had he not done the action with the hip, as I said. So he's made himself doubly vulnerable. He makes his hand vulnerable and he makes his hip vulnerable to the thrust. So if you just watch.
I'm actually physically stepping in, pushing the blade away.
So as you see, he stepped with his right hand side and then did that to take his hand off to the side, and that's a very, very, very dangerous thing. His hand should be in danger. Now at this point here, where he swept the sword so wide, the natural reaction that most people will take is to cut down at your wrist, and there's really at this point not much that he can do to stop you. If he brings his buckler forwards to prevent you from doing so, you'll get hit to the side because it's such a wide technique.
Now I've got an option here. I can either disengage and cut to your head, or when I've got your blade busy, I can step towards again and punch you in the face with the buckler.
Okay, so in the first case here, where he says I could step and I could cut you here, he could very simply do that, but he's massively open beneath the buckler. He's lost control of the guy's sword, stepped. The guy can still cover with his buckler and stab, and this is one of the hazards when you're fighting against something where your partner has something where you can block your blow directly. If you take this swing around here, you're no longer controlling his sword, he can hit you more or less wherever he wants. So very, 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 very dangerous. The second point of stepping in and smashing to the face. The problem with this is that he's obscured his own eyesight by doing this. So if you move and he's covering an awful lot of distance, Rupert's going to lose a leg or get stabbed on this side. This happens, I've seen it, I've trained it, I do it with people. Take my word for it. Now skip forwards a little bit, and we've got to the point where presenter doesn't want to get hit, so Rupert is going to explain to him that there is a counter. There is a way that you can stop the technique, which was wrong in the first place, from being wronger or something. I don't know. Anyway, he doesn't like it. They're going to do it. They're going to show you something now from the manual. It's very exciting.
So if we go back to where we were, I've got the blade here. I step forwards, and you know I've got two options. So you need to disengage your blade and then behind your head, and stepping forward onto your other foot.
Why, in the name of crap, would you do that? Why? I don't even want to look at the screen. That is cock. Why? From a point when you're here, when your opponent has got their blade here, when all you have to do is bring your sword over their sword, which is so wide it's no longer a danger to you. All you have to do is bring your sword over and point it directly at their face, or bring it over and cut their arm. Why in the name of crap would you bring your sword behind your head at that point? Now either the script writers or someone has made that decision to show that, and that is terrible. That is showing martial arts in such a bad way. At this point, when you have this, where you have the opportunity to put your point towards my face or to cut my arm, which is exposed, both of them at this point are exposed, but you will choose to remove all safety and bring your sword behind your head. That is terrible, BBC. So really I'm going to leave off by saying that programme in that section, that's the only one I'm talking about, not critiquing the rest of the programme. That part has represented the archaeological, the weaponry aspect very, very badly. It's represented the manuscript badly. I'm not impressed by this idea of having women representative of guile without really, really, really stark evidence. And I don't mean someone's opinion, someone might have said somewhere, I think it's representative of this. There's got to be a really good reason why you're putting women as being a figure of something else, as opposed to just being a woman in a bloody manuscript. Why can't she be there? Okay, simple. Sorry for getting cross about things like this. It's my area of expertise. It's something that I think we can do an awful lot better. If you'd like to talk about it more, I'll look at the comments a little bit and then probably get distracted by ice cream. Take care.